Yeah, we're doing that video today. I figured this mug would be appropriate because, today I'm going to be talking a lot of shit. Good afternoon. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you've been doing well, staying safe, washing your hands, all the stuff. Today's going to be slightly different from the usual format. However, still music related because this is going to be on the topic of music jobs. And I've been meaning to do this video for a while, but I just wanted to make sure that I was doing a thorough job and I was being accurate about it. And I just wanted to make sure that I had all my ducks in a row before I went ahead and pulled the trigger on things. For those of you that are new here, hi, I'm Miles. Welcome to the channel. On here I talk about music related stuff, whether it be how to play certain songs, how to use different pieces of gear, reviewing new pieces of gear, and other music related things of that nature. And today we're going to be talking about something else related to music, and that's going to be music related jobs. On that topic, we're going to be focusing in on the corporate business known as School of Rock. I used to work for School of Rock for nearly 10 years, and I also was hired for another business similar to the model that School of Rock uses in their business practices. So today we're going to be talking about some of the things I experienced during the time that I was working for the company. I also just want to note that this isn't some kind of hit piece or something like that. This isn't like an attack on School of Rock or any businesses like it, per se. It's more so just speaking from my own experiences and just to kind of give them as a sort of cautionary tale to anyone that might be working for or is considering working for one of these businesses. But just to make sure that my points are getting across thoroughly and that nothing that I'm saying is being misconstrued, I want to offer you guys a disclaimer. It's long, so I wrote it down. I want to emphasize that what I'm talking about is regarding my experience as an employee and not necessarily the same experience of every employee at every location or any of the businesses similar to my place of employment. I also don't want to paint this picture that my job was nothing but endless misery and woe, because in fact, I had countless incredible students that came through my room, and I witnessed a number of inspiring performances by students driven with a passion for doing their absolute best to serve themselves and the music they played. One of the best things that came from teaching and directing in the performance program was witnessing the progression of kids who sometimes walked into the room not knowing each other or having any motivation to even speak. Going from there and developing a strong long-term bond with other students, getting exposed to new and different types of music and musical techniques, and just gaining confidence overall. Depending on the show theme, I would integrate songs that everyone knew and loved along with lesser known but equally awesome songs from assorted artists. Most times, while students would initially be slow to catch on to what I was assigning them, eventually they would come to see the value of the music I would assign them, leading to these sort of, okay, I get it now, moments, as well as them usually doing their own deep dives into the artist's discography. One of the crowning achievements I had from directing shows was running a show where I put a selection of kids on the Iron Maiden song, The Trooper. As an instructor and director, I took the time to try and identify the strengths of each individual student and then cast them on songs that would bring out their best qualities and more. When this combination of kids performed this song, it was perfect. The stars aligned, and it was one of the show's best songs, leading to being selected for the Best of Season show at Highline Ballroom in NYC. Even better, what came from that performance is that the students who performed that song went on to start their own band, and each of them continue playing music to this day, furthering their own music careers. Another instance was when I directed a show focused on the music of Pink Floyd, where I had some kids that went from being completely unmotivated and antisocial to coming out of their shells and really wowing not only their families, but a large audience of families and students from other schools, as one of their songs was selected for the Best of Season show for Highline Ballroom. One of those students came into the show with a limited knowledge on the bass guitar, and not only did he kill every single song that he played on, but to this day he's progressed to a point where he is a monster of a bass player. While teaching at the school, I made a lot of close connections with students and their families and continue to periodically reach out and annoy many former students, checking in, making sure that they're still practicing, and some of them have found employment opportunities at record labels along with still performing to this day. The students and families made this job worthwhile, and I enjoyed every moment I spent watching them grow and flourish as musicians and creative people through the years. And that concludes the disclaimer. Alright, so let's get down to it. So first off, what is School of Rock? School of Rock and other businesses like it represent a music education business model built around attributes from the music world in order to build an environment of positivity and music education for students of all ages, but primarily kids. It's a place where you can learn how to play an instrument, how to play along with other people, learn your favorite songs, and eventually perform those songs in front of a live audience. So it's kind of like the Walmart of music. There's going to be instances where rather than saying School of Rock, I'm going to be saying corporate music school or CMS. And that's just simply because a lot of the attributes that go into the business model for School of Rock also can be applied to other places as well. So School of Rock is certainly different from a traditional music school. How, you ask? What makes the corporate music school model different from a traditional music school model is that while traditional music school's main focus and emphasis is on education, for without, the physical execution of playing lacks any real understanding of what you're doing. The corporate music school model focuses more so on the experience of playing the instrument and interacting with other musicians, and less so on the sort of strict focus of the educational value of learning an instrument and learning how to read sheet music and all of those things. In my experience, there seemed to be more of a push for quantity over quality in terms of trying to sign up as many students as possible in one time, rather than focusing on the students that are already enrolled in the school and trying to turn them into the best musicians they can possibly be. Which to most may not seem surprising as a corporate business, being that a corporate business is going to be focused more so on turning as much of a profit as possible, rather than putting all of its focus into one singular product and making that product into the best thing it can possibly be. That product being the students. But with that in mind, it's important to remember that these places are focusing their attention primarily at kids, and a corporate business is not going to cater to the needs of a young child, which can lead to some problems. Some of the things that I encountered while I was working at the school was that for a long time there were no designated teaching materials to utilize in lessons. So the teaching style and approach was going to be different from one teacher to the next, and the distribution of that information for each student would be getting to them either at different points, or some information wouldn't be getting to them at all, depending on the abilities of the teacher themselves. However, it's my understanding that after I left my place of work, they've recently started implementing their own teaching materials for all the teachers to use in their lessons, so everything's a little bit more streamlined. Of course, this is after I worked there for nearly 10 years, but, whatever. Another notable point is that students could sign up for lessons without actually owning or having access to the instruments that they were looking to take lessons in, which, in that moment, you'd sign up and, in some cases, students go out, they buy the instrument, and they get the ball rolling, and they're ready to go, or they rent it, but they have an instrument in their possession that they can use to practice. However, this was not always the case, and there were many students that would only have access to the instruments that they were learning when they would come in for their lessons. And so for the teachers that were doing their lessons, it made for a very difficult process of trying to progress forward through new information, because more often than not, students go home after their one lesson a week, they come back, all that information from last week is gone, and we're starting back at square one again. So this could be frustrating for both the instructors and the student. At the school that I worked at, we had house instruments that we'd have available for students who didn't have their own with them when they came in for their lesson, which eventually started to kind of become more of a problem than a solution to a problem, because you'd have kids that would be coming from practice at school, from their sports team practice, and they own a guitar, they own a bass, they own whatever, but they don't want to bring it with them to school. So they just come in and they say, I'll use a house instrument. So now you have other kids that have been signed up for lessons, but they don't actually own instruments, and they're looking to use those house instruments when they come in, and they're not available because that kid who came in for his rehearsal for his show is now using that guitar or bass or whatever in rehearsal. So it became a bit dysfunctional at times. As far as employment at my old job, the factors that went into getting a job there really came down to your personality and more so your availability. So if you had an open schedule and you had no other obligations and you were available for management to call you up whenever to fill in the gaps in other people's schedules and really just kind of pick up the slack on their end, you were going to be more of a considerable option to them in terms of employment. There seemed to have been less of an emphasis put on an employee's work history, whether it been music related or not, let alone if they had any sort of abilities musically or any experience when it came to doing education-based work. What this meant was that there'd be instances where you or your kid could be sitting across from someone who isn't necessarily the most knowledgeable on the information that they're trying to convey to you or your child that you're paying a buttload of money for. And this can especially show itself when it comes to the group classes. Now, naturally, in a group class, the main focus is going to be on inclusion of everyone in the group and making sure that everyone is involved in some sort of way so that no one is sitting on the sidelines doing nothing. However, if you have a student that's in the group that has developmental disabilities or emotional issues, or is just a brat and is taking all the attention away from the instructors that are catering to the rest of the group to focus solely on them, it's going to cause a bit of a problem in terms of the group dynamic, as well as making the overall environment kind of unwelcoming to everyone. And to be fair, this isn't all just on the kids. This also happened with the adult groups as well. And while rising to these challenges may make a member of the staff look like a determined and considerate individual, it still doesn't qualify them as experienced music teacher, which is what you were looking for in the first place when you signed up for lessons, right? So how do these corporate music schools get around these problems and keep themselves from getting lost in the crowd? They put an emphasis on the experience.
School of Rock, the most revolutionary music education school in the world. Learn to rock on stage and in life. Tour the country as a headline act. Become a gigging musician in your community.
And countless other quotes that promote the idea of being a rock star. One of the many programs the school offers is a program called House Band, and this serves as free advertisement for the school. Students would sign up to audition for the house band, and if they got in, they would then be enlisted to go out and play a series of strategically placed gigs where people would be able to see them publicly perform and would be motivated to find out more information about the school. So this meant street fairs, this meant playing at local venues where people would be walking by and be able to hear music being played. They'd see the flyers outside, and it was a great way to kind of stir up new business and get people interested in seeing what was really going on. And to its credit, the kids that I remember from house band were all incredibly talented, and they deserved to go out and play and be seen by other people. However, even though house band pretty much serves as free advertisement for the school, you as a student have to pay more to be a part of it. The program is in addition to your one-on-one lessons that you have every week, and you can't substitute house band for those lessons. Or at least that's what they want you to think. So you'll just have to do both. And in many cases, it's beneficial to students because if you have a new song that you have to learn in a small amount of time, having an outside resource to go to in your lesson is definitely beneficial. But either way, you got to pay for both now. But by utilizing the house band in this way, it served as a great means of drawing in some new interest into the school. Kids would see their friends playing at street fairs and they'd want to know how they could be a part of it. Adults would see a group of kids playing a Led Zeppelin song and they'd be like, who the hell are these kids? Is there something that I can do? I want to do this. And so they sign up and they come in for lessons. And once you're signed up for lessons, from there you'll be regularly encouraged to sign up for more programs within the school. For example, gee, those guitar lessons are going really well. You should sign up for one of our shows. Boy, you did a great job with that show. Have you thought about auditioning for house band? You know, you're doing an awesome job with house band. Maybe you should try checking out All Stars this summer. And the cycle continues. One might assume that the staff at a supposed music school would be knowledgeable, actual musicians with at least some background in education, therefore making them suitable teachers. And having some background working with members of the special needs community is certainly a plus that makes the entire environment of the school more welcoming to all patrons. However, many of the people that I worked with over the years didn't study music in college, nor did they have any experience when it came to music performance. I actually joked to my boss once about how in a doctor's office they have all of their diplomas and certificates above their desk in their office just to kind of let the patient know that they're knowledgeable in their field and that we should start implementing that same sort of practice when it comes to the teachers at the school. He didn't think that would be a good idea. Sure, you could list off the names of all the bands that you've been in over the years, but few people might take into account that maybe that just means that you're really good at getting kicked out of bands. As for me, and for those of you who don't already know, I actually studied music at SUNY Purchase in New York, studying in the music conservatory and graduating with a bachelor's in music composition and production. And during a portion of my time while still in school and immediately after school, I spent most of my time going out and teaching within the walls of schools, as well as doing house calls. However, when I graduated, the job market was crap. And so the jobs that I did have were either limited in terms of their hours or they closed soon after they hired me because they just didn't have any students at all. But between ice cuts at my day job at the ice skating rink, I went out and I still taught because I had the drive and the motivation to go out and find full-time work as a music teacher. And then one day a buddy reached out to me and asked me if I want to be a sub at his job at School of Rock. So say for a moment that you're me. You're working mostly on your own, and when you're working for someone else, the amount of students that you have is limited. And when you're teaching on your own, the scheduling is kind of at the mercy of your students and their parents. And so you have instances where you'll be walking up to the front door of a student's house to get a call from the parents inside the house that say, oh, I'm sorry, I totally forgot. So-and-so has soccer practice and we have to go, so we have to cancel for today. Even though you've already traveled over to their house. So having a weekly schedule that lacked any consistency made it really hard for me to have a stable financial situation. And maybe when you were an undergrad, you didn't pay that much attention when you were in class. And after you graduated, you went and enrolled in a community college for a year so that you could fend off paying back your student loans for a little bit longer. But now you're ready to buckle down and get right in on doing the whole adult thing. But overall, you feel, and you've been told, that you're underqualified for specific positions that you're applying for because of the diploma that you graduated with. Well, there's hope. There's a slew of places that have been sprouting up over the past 15 years or so that offer an opportunity for the young musician looking to make some money and to gain some real-life work experience. You might not be a musical genius, but you've got personality and you've played in the band before, so you've already got some stage time under your belt. So come on in and take this job. And I did. It wasn't consistent at first because when I first got picked up as an employee, I wasn't a full-time employee. I was just simply an on-call sub. So I would get calls usually 30 minutes before a lesson because someone called out or someone got rescheduled, and they'd ask me if I could do it. And if I was available to go and do the lesson, I would go travel over to the school and I'd do it. And there might be another lesson that follows after that, or I could have been traveling all the way out there for simply just one lesson. But I still did it. And honestly, I wouldn't wish this on anyone unless they just don't have a life and they'd rather spend their time staring at their phone, waiting and hoping that they're going to get a phone call for a lesson so they can pack up all their stuff, get into their car, travel over to the school, and hope that they get paid just enough that they can pay for gas to get there and get home. But still, I stuck with it because I figured it was an opportunity to build up a reputation with the school and to eventually start getting some of my own students on a regular schedule. Now, some of you that already teach on your own probably already know this stuff, but let's talk about it anyway in terms of what perks come with working for someone else as a teacher. For one, someone else is doing the scheduling for you. So that means that you don't have to worry about keeping track of phone calls, keeping track of phone numbers, organizing your schedule around individual lessons, and whether or not they're going to be coming to your house or if you're going to them. All your students are scheduled for one location, and all you got to do is just show up and teach them. And with corporate music schools being franchised, they're pretty much popping up everywhere. And so that makes them very accessible to you, where you probably don't have to travel too far to get to work. And more than likely, you'll find yourself in a position working amongst friends and even your bandmates in some cases. But there's a few things. Now, there's more to it than just this, but let's say you just graduated, you got your degree, but it's not necessarily in music education. If you can smile and you got personality and you're approachable and your schedule's clear and available, you'll probably get the job. But once you walk through that door, don't think for 1 second that you are a music teacher. You are an instructor. If you've graduated from being an on-call sub, or you've been hired right out the gate as an instructor, you're more than likely going to be getting paid as a private contractor, with your tax forms being a 1099. What this means is that any money that would normally come out of your paycheck is not coming out of your paycheck as far as deductions are concerned, and you are going to be responsible for them when tax time comes around. Aside from that, because you're a private contractor, that gives you zero job security. The summer comes along and you have the option now to either go out and find another job in the meantime, or to stick around to school, hope that there's something to do that'll make you some money, and in the meantime sustain yourself with ramen noodles. With the lack of job security, this means that there could be days where you're ready to go to work and then you find out through a phone call that there's no students for you and you don't have to come in. This also means that your regular schedule can fluctuate drastically from week to week. Because most corporate music schools follow the school calendar, this means that during the school year, you're going to have a fairly consistent schedule. But again, when summer comes around, that could mean that everyone disappears. And the summer format at the school tends to be very different from what it is during the school year. More on that later. As an instructor, there really isn't a high expectation for you aside from showing up to work. You don't need to have a teaching degree, and you don't need to have like a vast amount of musical experience. You basically serve as a year-round camp counselor. This doesn't necessarily have to be the case, but if you want to have a nice, full, consistent schedule, you want to have a big personality that draws people in so that they feel enticed to sign up for lessons with you, so that you don't kind of get sucked into the background as an instructor. However, in my experience, I found that what tends to be lacking, or at least conditional, is respect. Respect in regards to your time, respect in regards to the situations that you may find yourself in as an instructor in a corporate music school. And I don't want to make a big generalized statement, so I'll just go off of my own experience at the place that I worked at. During my time working at School of Rock, there was a period where I was abruptly switched from a W-2 to a 1099 tax form, and I wasn't clearly notified about it. It was just a change that was kind of pushed through to me and all the other instructors. Incidentally, at the same time, we were short-staffed, and so I was responsible for directing 2 shows at the same time, and I had a pretty full schedule of individual lessons as well. And so because of the increase in my workload, as well as the lack of clarification in terms of the changing of the tax forms that were attached to my employment, I was getting my paychecks and I was like, I'm making a lot of money. And in my brain, I saw it as, well, obviously I'm working more hours and I'm doing more stuff and I'm taking on more responsibility. And with that, clearly management is appreciating the effort that I'm putting forward on their behalf. And so they're showing their appreciation and they're paying me more. I was very naive. Everything was really fast-paced between me and everyone else at work. And then April came around and I realized that I owe a lot of money. Money that I didn't have. And I can't speak for everyone, but I know from my own experience of going through long periods of time of being absolutely broke, that when I did get some money, I was quicker to cash that check than I was to scan through all the deductions and everything else on the pay stub. At least that's how I handled things at the time. I'm better now. But needless to say, when tax time came around, I was in trouble. And I wasn't the only one who fell victim to this change. It affected enough people on staff that we eventually were switched back from 1099s to W-2s. But at this point, the damage had already been done. So really the moral of that story is just make sure that you know what your pay situation is at work. Make sure that you know how much you're getting paid, the hours that you worked, and make sure that you're getting paid for those hours. And make sure that if deductions are being taken from your paycheck, what those deductions are covering. And if no deductions are coming from your paycheck, make sure that you know that, and that when tax time comes around, you're not showing up to do your taxes empty-handed. Now, in addition to the tax fiasco, little consideration went into how instructors were paired with students. I would frequently find myself being scheduled with students that were too young to be taking on the responsibility of lessons on a stringed instrument, let alone being old enough to know how to keep it in tune. Or even better, I'd find myself being scheduled to teach lessons on an instrument that I don't even know how to play, like the drums. This was mostly because where I worked, the emphasis was on getting in as many students as you possibly could, as often as you could, whenever they were available, with any instructor that was available, even if they couldn't play a paradiddle to save their life. The main objective being to get families with young students, for longevity at the school, to bring their kids in for trial lessons in hopes that that'll lead to regular lessons, where if you continually shower the kids with praise and promise the families that their kids are making constant progress when they come in week after week for their lessons, that the families will be compelled to stay for years on end and sign up for other programs, shelling out more and more money for a staff that's potentially just being a glorified babysitter to their kid. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand as a music teacher that working with kids also comes along with their own behavioral and emotional difficulties that'll make them less than motivated to want to practice their instrument or even stay focused. Believe me, I know. That kind of stuff I'm fine with, and I've gotten pretty good over the years at helping students find their musical identity, therefore making them more motivated to want to practice. However, I know that when I was 6 and I got my first guitar, it was a full-size acoustic, and I couldn't even take lessons because back then, music teachers could turn away students because they felt like they were too young to take the instrument seriously, or in my case, because I was left-handed and I was holding the instrument wrong. And while I was motivated to play the guitar because I saw my dad playing his guitar, I was easily distracted. I got frustrated when I'd press my fingers down the strings and I wouldn't hear a note, or my fingers would hurt after a short period of time. And so with that frustration, I'd put it back in the case and I'd go back to riding my bike because I knew how to do that. So with that said, a child that's under the age of 6 is probably not a good candidate for guitar lessons. If anything, at their age, maybe the piano or the drums would be a better candidate for them to just kind of explore their musical interests. And that's not to take anything away from the drums or the piano and imply that they're simpler instruments, because they're certainly not. I still can't play the piano good, and I still can't play the drums good. But the layout of how everything is presented on a piano and on a drum set is a lot simpler to see than it is on a stringed instrument like the guitar or bass. Having smaller hands is less of a factor because as long as you can hold drumsticks, you're in good shape. And when it comes to the piano, as long as you can press the keys down, you can still play some notes. But with stringed instruments like the guitar or the bass, inevitably, little hands are going to start to hurt when they press down on steel strings, and even on nylon strings in some cases. And with that, there's also the effort of trying to find an instrument that they can sit down with and practice on. With an acoustic guitar, the body is a little bit too big for some students, and sometimes the neck is too wide for a kid to wrap their hand around to reach the strings. And forget about the bass. If you're going to play the lower notes, you got to reach way up high. There certainly are exceptions that exist, but in most cases, this is what happens, and it's okay. Additionally, the school offered group classes with these limitations in mind. In this sort of scenario, young kids get to be in the same room as other kids their age, sometimes their schoolmates, and they get to explore not just one instrument while they sit across from one instructor, but a whole set of options of instruments in one room that they can explore and go from one to the next and see what's a better fit for them. And there's much less focus required than there would be if you were in a one-on-one lesson with an instructor. And so that would usually be my recommendation to families after I realized that one-on-one instruction with a young student isn't going to work out. However, it was quickly made apparent to me that being honest with parents and recommending that their kid come back when they're a little bit bigger or a little bit older for one-on-one lessons, or recommending that they do a group class instead of individual lessons, was not okay with management. And in some cases, some parents just don't want to hear someone else say that their kid isn't good at something. Which, sure, I guess, I get it. I mean, I'm not happy if someone says that my kid isn't doing well when it comes to something that they're trying, but I don't take that as a personal attack. But as kids, no purpose is being served with having them have someone in their life that, rather than telling them what they need to work on, is just continually telling them how awesome they are at everything. I'm not saying tell kids that they're terrible, but if you see an area that they need to work on more, point it out. And the parent should be on board with that as well. It's the same sort of approach that I would want for the teachers of my kids. So if they're struggling in a certain subject, I want to know about it so that I can help them with it and encourage them to start implementing better practices in terms of studying and just staying focused. And in my experience, when it comes to music, if you force too much on a kid when it comes to playing an instrument, they're going to eventually grow to hate that instrument. They're not going to want to play it ever again. But again, with management, this did not go over well. They didn't like the idea of a family pulling their kid out of lessons because money. So basically, if you're doing your job as an educator and you're being honest with the families of your students and you're letting them know where their child has shortcomings and places that they need to put more focus in terms of improvement, but you don't follow it with an immediate flood of praise about all the awesome things they're doing outside of that, you're doing your job wrong. And not only are you doing your job wrong, but you're damaging the business and you're a bad employee. There were certainly circumstances that were out of my control where a student would decide before even coming in for lessons with me or after a short period of time with lessons with me, where they would tell their parents, I don't want to do this. And that's okay. That happens. That's a part of this whole process. You feel out something new and either you bond with it or you don't. And that's okay. Not everyone's going to have the same drive and motivation to want to continue to pursue playing an instrument. But for me, these instances were used as an opportunity to question my abilities as an instructor and to then punish me with a limited schedule with very big gaps in between my lessons. Now, some of you by now might be thinking you're better off suited going and pursuing a degree that'll get you into a position where you can get a teaching job at, say, a public school. And there's certainly perks that come along with that. You get paid for the time that you're at work, not for when you're doing work. You get sick days and potential health benefits. In some cases, there's job security via a union. And in most cases, you get discounts on resources that you use for your job, like recording equipment, music, paper, things like that. But you also might be thinking that if you just continue to work at a corporate music school and you go up through the ranks, that eventually you'll become a teacher. Nope. You'll always be an instructor with the potential for your hours and your work responsibilities, and sometimes your pay, to fluctuate. And if you start asking for things like a raise or for more consistent hours so that the money that you're already making is consistent enough that it's fulfilling the financial needs that you're looking to fulfill by getting this job in the first place, what you're probably going to get in return is taking on responsibilities that you don't necessarily want to take on, hours that you don't necessarily want to take on, and your job is going to see it as, well, we did you a favor, so now you got to help us out. And if you don't follow through, you'll probably get punished with less hours. Almost anywhere you work within the music industry, you'll find that the environment is a competitive one. This is the case with most jobs in general, but with a music school, while the environment is competitive, ideally, the main objective is for the entire collective of the staff to be working towards a common goal of making the business, the school, better. For a period of time while I was at School of Rock, me and my coworkers had a connection and a camaraderie that existed not just within the walls of the school, but also outside of work, where we would hang out and play gigs together. And we were all connected and would feed off each other and try to adapt different approaches to teaching and would ask each other about difficult students and how to address it and stuff like that. And it was a really sort of beneficial environment for not just us, but also the students as well. However, as time went on, the environment started to change. Members of staff came and went, but what really made the most drastic changes in the environment and the dynamic of work was changes in management. At the location that I worked at during that time, there were several changes over with general managers coming and going, and each one that came through had a different approach to how they were going to run the business. Because of the franchise nature of the location of where I worked, the owner of the school didn't actually work at the location that I was at. So that meant that whomever they put in positions of management, they had kind of an authority over what they would do and how they would run the school. They'd periodically pop their heads into the school, see what was going on, seeing how the building was being kept overall, get to know the faces of the staff, kind of get to know who the staff were on a closer, more personal level. And just overall, they were the means of any support and funding needed for the school and for equipment and whatnot. They were the means of us getting that money. However, this dynamic caused conflicts along the way. Either conflicts between management that was on site at the school and the staff that were directly teaching the students, or with management and the owners of the actual school location. In cases like these, I like to believe that the owners are taking at least some time to have some idea of the types of people they're hiring for positions of management of their businesses, making sure that whomever they hire is best suited for the position and is going to interact with the staff on a level that's going to not cause any sort of problems and cause any disruptions in terms of business. However, not all business owners are created equal, and sometimes they hire people for management positions that aren't necessarily suited for the job, but they fill the position that they need filled so that the ball can continue to roll. Which, who can blame them? Indirectly, running a business has to be so much work. Especially if you're making so much money that you've opened up a second business and now you have to run both of them at the same time. But ask yourself, if you hire someone that you don't know or their past work experience, and you hire them without even knowing if they're qualified for the job, and now after hiring them, they're finding out that because of them, all these new problems are arising within your business, aren't you just giving yourself more work? This leads me to a story of one of the general managers that I had to work under during my time at School of Rock. At one point, a general manager was brought in who clearly had a history working for retail. And I say that because of how he was approaching running the business. And one of the ways that he wanted to run the business was to start selling stuff from within the school. Not just like clothes or something, but like selling like music equipment, which on paper isn't necessarily the worst idea, because if you're running a music school, you'd benefit from selling guitar picks, selling guitar strings. Maybe a kid doesn't have a cable for their amp at home and they want to buy one so they can bring it home and they can practice plugged into an amp, whatever. Small things like that. But what about a drum set? I know most people these days are doing their shopping online, but when it comes to a drum set, more often than not, if a customer's looking to buy one, they're not just going to walk in off the street and buy the first one they see, not knowing anything about it or without playing it at all. So if you're trying to sell a drum set at an actual music store, what tends to happen is that people come in, they want to sit down, they want to play on the set for a little bit, they want to noodle around with it, they want to know the details in the background about the instrument, and they want to know how much it's going to cost, how they're going to transport it. Do you have shell cases? Do you have all these other things that you might need? Do I need to get new cymbals? How many sticks should I get? Should I just get 2? But this isn't how things went down, because we weren't working at Sam Ash. And even more so, this manager told everyone not to touch this drum set, because where it sat in the lobby, if anyone was to play it, it would make too much noise. And plus, if anyone plays it, they're going to damage it. And let's not forget, it's on sale. So now imagine you're a parent who's already thrown down a whole bunch of money so that both of your kids can do 2 separate shows at the school while they're still doing their own individual lessons at the school. You basically live in your car at this point because, let's not forget, both of your kids are doing 2 separate shows. So you go and drop off one kid, you go and pick up the other kid, you go and get them dinner on the way to their show rehearsal, and on your way to go pick up your other kid, you're doing all this running around, and then one day you walk into the school where you're already spending all this money, and a manager wants you to take a look at this drum kit that he has for sale. There's no brand name components, no one on staff knows any information about the drum kit because it's got no brand name, and because no one's allowed to touch it. And frankly, you don't even know how this new guy even got this drum set in the first place. Do you think a sale's gonna get made? Additionally, this general manager attempted to implement guidelines for the staff that if they had a no-show or a last-minute cancellation for a lesson, that if they still wanted to get paid for that time that they were already assigned to be at the school for, that they would have to do something else around the school, like clean the floors in the hallways or clean the bathrooms. For me personally, when I have a no-show or I have a cancellation at the last minute, I consider that amount of time that I now have available to me to be my time. This usually means that I have an opportunity to work on music for either another student or for stuff that I'm working on for myself. Or better yet, in most cases, I took it as an opportunity to go out and grab something to eat because we don't get lunch breaks. Oh, I didn't mention that? No? Oh, no, you don't get lunch breaks. Yeah, no, you don't get a lunch break because it's assumed that because the school opens up in the afternoon, that you've had ample time to either make yourself something to eat and bring it with you to work, or to get yourself something to eat before you come into work. Assuming that you don't have a second job that you're coming straight from to go to your teaching job because you don't make enough money at your teaching job for it to be your only job. Anyways, in the case of gaps, I utilized that time for my benefit. It was my time. I was there to work anyway, and then there wasn't work for me to do. So I figure either I'm going to work on stuff that I need to do for myself for gigs that I have outside of work, or I'm going to go and feed myself. Man, I'm just thinking about when I used to get music prepared for gigs. Remember going out and seeing live music? Oh, man, those were the days. Anyway, as far as doing any sort of custodial work around the school, like cleaning, dealing with cleaning supplies, or mopping the bathroom floors and cleaning up bodily fluids, for me and the majority of the rest of the staff, it was an immediate no-go. Some people opted to try to start doing some of the work because they were worried that if they didn't, they were going to lose their hours. But for the rest of us, at the very least, we didn't come in dressed to do that kind of work. And furthermore, it's also the kind of work that I didn't sign up to do with this job. So needless to say, with enough complaining from the staff, eventually this whole policy kind of just disappeared. Oh, and before I forget, this same general manager, when he was first brought on, he was introduced to me by the owners of the school. And I sat down and talked to him for a little bit just to get to know him initially. And he first asked me, what instruments do you teach at the school? And before I could even answer him, he said, wait, let me guess. You must be the bass teacher. And I'm guessing you probably do really well teaching reggae. Which I can't for the life of me know what would make him jump to that kind of conclusion. I don't know. I have no idea. It's a mystery to me to this day. Anyway, he didn't last very long at the school, and it wasn't because he did anything inappropriate at the school. I mean, he did. He said and did things that were inappropriate in front of members of staff as well as parents of students. He also divulged personal information of mine in front of my students and in front of parents of students. So there was no shortage of that stuff. No, he got fired after he had an argument with the owner of the school, which really shows where the owner of the school's priorities lie. So, cool. This wouldn't be the only change in terms of general management and management in general, but we'll get into more of that stuff as we go along. I don't want to go on like a forever rant about the individual incidents that took place while I worked at the school, because I don't think it's going to serve any real broad purpose. I will, however, outline some things that happened to me that I think are general enough that anyone who previously or currently still works within this sort of work environment can relate to. Now, this may come as a surprise, but at the beginning of the day, you're a human. And at the end of the day, you're still going to be human. A human who has a life that exists outside of their job. If you try to acknowledge that life in a way that's not going along with how the corporate music school runs, it could run you into some problems. Like I mentioned previously, working as an instructor could be a good option for someone who's fresh out of school and is just looking to make some money. Everyone's circumstances are different, but the point is that the job itself is accessible and the job hours are seemingly flexible. If you can write tabs, you're in good shape. If you can play power chords and bar chords, even better. If you can play solos that people recognize from their favorite songs, that'll most likely put you in position to be one of the instructors that are sought after by students young and old. Now, let's say you're a musician who's still active and playing out on the regular. Or let's say you're a parent who is looking for a job where they can raise some money and take care of their kids. Or perhaps you fit into both of those categories. That's all fine and good so long as your family and your musical endeavors don't get in the way of your position as a music instructor. As for me, I came into the job as a young parent, and my son at the time was young enough that he wasn't in school yet, and it worked out because I wasn't working regular hours yet. I was still just working as an on-call sub. And fortunately enough for me, my parents were happy to babysit whenever I would get calls to go in and work. And even once I got brought on as a regular employee, the management at the time was understanding of the fact that I had other things going on in my life outside of work. And so sometimes situations would come up, and just overall it was understood that I wasn't just this fixture that existed in the school, just waiting for the next time I had the opportunity to do some work. A few years and a few management changes later, I found out that my daughter was going to be born. And when I found out the news, I didn't tell my boss right away. I was right to be hesitant to tell my boss the news, because once I did, my relationship with my boss as well as the owners of the school changed drastically. Now I was being treated differently because now I wasn't the same employee that they hired all those years ago. Now I was being viewed as a burden and as someone who was potentially going to be unreliable. Which, since we're on the subject anyway, I should note that within the corporate music school model, that instructors not only don't get sick and vacation days, but on top of that, they also don't get paternity leave. I would hope that if I were a pregnant female, that management and my coworkers would be jumping at the chance to support me and do whatever they could for their coworker who was about to have a baby. But I can tell you as a male that management made it very clear to me that I needed to have as good of an idea as I could as to when my daughter was going to be born so as to avoid missing as few lessons as possible, and that while I was away, I wasn't going to be making any sort of money at all. But anyway, when I first came to School of Rock, it was understood that musicians worked within the walls of the school, meaning that there'd be instances where outside gigs would come up and we as musicians would oblige those opportunities to make some extra money. And so when an outside work opportunity would come up, we would contact management and let them know, with the understanding that this wasn't going to be a regular thing. We weren't going to be absent from work on the same day at the same time every single week. Because if a kid is missing their lesson every week because their teacher's not there, they're going to want to have a different teacher. And if it was really short notice, you would go and reach out to one of your coworkers and see if they would cover your students for you. But if you couldn't find coverage, you understood that you have to give up that opportunity because your first commitment is to your job. You made that commitment first, so you got to show up to work. It was understood by us as instructors, and it was understood by management. And so everything went fairly smooth for the most part. But as time went on and his ownership changed hands, this 2-week policy became more of like a 3-week policy. And if you didn't adhere to it, it could lead to you having your schedule be so depleted that you're now down to such a small number of students that you feel compelled to quit your job. And even with this wide window of notice now in place, it was still encouraged for you to find your own coverage, even though someone who was hired on salary pay for scheduling exists within the school. But fine, you find coverage, you do everything the way that it's supposed to be done, you go out and you play your gig, you make your money, water under the bridge, you're moving on, back to work, doing your thing. But don't think that management forgot about when you called out of work and why you called out, and don't think that they're not keeping track of the frequency of how often you call out of work for outside things. But don't think you're going to get fired for doing exactly the thing that they're promoting to these kids that come in as students. You know, the being a musician thing. Or for being a parent who has the responsibility of taking care of their kids, which, I don't know, maybe makes you a better candidate as an instructor at a school primarily directed at teaching kids, because you've got plenty of time dealing with your own screaming kids, so probably you're better suited to handle someone else's screaming kid. No, what would happen is that you'd be met with a guilt trip from management about even thinking about calling out of work. And so now you're faced with the choice of what's going to be sacrificed. Time with your kids, opportunities to make more money at a different gig, versus coming in and working at your job and not having to worry about the hours that you have on your schedule fluctuating in any sort of way. In my experience working for a corporate music school, it seems that the only consideration is for the people that are at the top. They're the ones who get sick time and vacation days and salary pay, while you, the one who's doing all the lessons with the students, the one who's doing the trial lessons who get the students to sign up for regular lessons, the one who's directing the shows that get the family and friends to come out and bring their family and friends out with them, that entices more business to come into the school, and who is essentially the pillar that the entire business model rests upon, you get nothing. You have to constantly decide whether or not to call out of work because the weather's bad, or because you're sick, or if there's a family emergency, or if there's a family event like a wedding, versus going into your job and working your hours as you're scheduled to. I would hope that this circumstance is one that's unique to where I worked, but at some point along the way, payroll started being done in a way that was a bit of a mystery to me and my coworkers. We didn't know what the exact process was, but we started to gather as time went on that the way that the process worked, it allowed for students' lessons to be lost within individual instructor schedules. And by lost, I mean we weren't getting paid for them. When I asked my boss about why in my personal records my hours didn't add up to what was on my pay stub, he gave me a long-winded excuse about how,
well, this student's been with the school for a long time, and so we need to be able to give exceptions for when they have instances where they can't make it in for their lessons.
A lesson that I showed up to teach and I should be paid for because I'm there to work. And the relationship between the business and the individual customers is not up to me to cover financially. Still, this seemed to be a practice that went into full effect once a mass email went out to everyone about how the business was going paperless. Which, for a business where we printed out countless sheets of music and countless copies of tab paper on the daily, seemed really kind of funny. So with the guilt trips and the possibility of your schedule being fluctuated into something that you couldn't even recognize and that you definitely couldn't afford to live off of, what became a regular practice was myself and all my coworkers would come into work even though we were sick. This is notable because not every school location is the same. They vary in size, and some can be very big buildings where there's lots of space between each individual person that's inside the building, or it could be a very compact, small space that everyone's working within. Overall, though, most of the schools are not very big, and once they're packed full of students that are taking lessons and are running around doing group lessons and whatnot, it seems like a very compact and confined environment. The building can get very warm because everyone's moving around, there's lots of kids running around, there's group lessons going on, everyone's playing their instruments, music equipment is on, up and running. Plus, at the front desk, there's a communal iPad for everyone to drag their fingers across so they can sign in whenever they enter the building. Which, in normal times, is gross, let alone present day. And at one point, I guess the GM thought that he'd be saving money by taking the soap dispensers in the bathroom when they were getting low on soap and just filling them up a little bit with some water, diluting the actual cleaning ability of the soap, which is also gross. I'd say given the current circumstances, that'd be problematic. Needless to say, me and my coworkers were sick, and we were sick often. One person would come in sick, and that same virus would get passed around to everyone and circulate its way through the school. But we all still show up to work because we can't afford to not go to work because everyone needs their money. And no one wants to lose their students, and so the cycle would continue where one person would come in sick, and progressively it would go around to everyone until eventually everyone was down with the sickness. But again, think about the most important factor that goes into all of how this is playing out: money. So with all that being said, one might think to ask, How long do you think it's going to be before one of these corporate music schools decides to stop reporting COVID cases where they end up having to shut down the entire school for an extended period of time? Missing out on that sweet, sweet money. Because the schools have shut down previously when someone would test positive for COVID and they might have been inside the walls of the school. But now winter is upon us, and that's the time where everyone's trying to make as much money as they possibly can because they know when summer comes, that's when it's the dry season. And they're especially desperate for money because any sort of opportunities for outside gigs are slim and none at this point. And then, of course, we have the holidays upon us as well. Merry Christmas, by the way. And you might be thinking, okay, fine, so you gotta take your vitamins and you gotta cover your mouth when you sneeze. You gotta take precautions, you gotta do what you gotta do, make sure that you're keeping yourself safe. And yes, you should try to plan ahead for any and all situations that might come up while you're at work. But let's talk about the unplanned. Let's say you find out there's a stomach bug going around the school and you start to realize that there's a good possibility that you might have it. What do? Do you hope that you have a nice, quick, and easy day that doesn't require you to sing or you don't have to sneeze? Or do you try to call out of work early? In most workplaces in this sort of circumstance, you would tell the person in charge that you're not feeling well and that you need to leave, and it's fine so long as the next time you come in, you present a doctor's note to management. In my experience, even when I realized that I wasn't feeling well and I found coverage for the remainder of my lessons for the day and I let management know and they said it was okay, it was still a problem because I didn't go to my boss, my top boss, directly to have him guilt trip me into trying to stay at work. And I'll be honest, I was upset because I went through all the proper channels to do everything the right way so that I wouldn't ruffle any feathers as far as management was concerned. I was also upset because I now had to rush home because I realized that I got a stomach virus that is not running on the same timetable as me. And I didn't even really get in trouble. It was more of just my boss going behind my back to my coworkers and talking about me in a negative manner. That and messing with my hours, I guess, to assert his dominance over me as my boss. Real cool guy. Now here's another scenario. Let's say you're a parent and you get a text from your kid's school saying that your kid is sick and they need to be picked up and brought home. Or what if you find out while you're at work that someone that you care about deeply has passed away? Should you feel obligated to continue working for the rest of your shift? Or should you be able to go and be with the ones that you care about in this time of mourning? Or rent's due, or you need to buy groceries so that you can make yourself something to bring with you to work because, don't forget, no lunch breaks. Or maybe you need to pay back people that you owe money to from when you borrowed money from them when you didn't have any between paychecks. In the lives of most people, it's a pretty easy choice as to how you're going to address those kinds of scenarios. The point is that if the situation is desperate enough, you may find yourself reconsidering your available options.